when you're composing, do you actually use words at all for yourself, or is it just a matter of notes on a piece of paper and just what sounds can do? Do you actually use concepts at all, or is it just completely in the sound, dealing with the sounds, or is it nothing like either of those things?
Well, the short answer is that I write in shapes, not in a sense, and texture, and volume, and all the parameters. It is my understanding of dealing with these things, like dynamics, for instance. In essence, it's what keeps me awake at night. I can't say that it interests me in that sense, because I really like sleeping. So the internal thing, if I can articulate, is the question of these abstract concepts, and they carry me forward into the night. But the problem with them is that they're never resolved. But I would never, as it were, would write it, take a shape and write it down. It's purely something. My shapes generally are pretty cubist, and that there are very rarely any bridge passages in my music, in the sense that my abstraction is that there are journeys within the cube, and there are ramifications about why something comes next. You find this is very difficult for me to talk about. I've never talked about it before. So the whole concept of bridge passages, in fact, that maybe all my pieces are bridge passages to something that is not resolved. It's not moving anywhere. It gets to a point, and then you begin with another cube. Does that make sense? I've just been listening to my earth dances, which they're doing tomorrow night, and that's a series of very large cubes, and I'm sort of fascinated by hearing pieces that I haven't heard for a while. In a sense, first of all, I consider all my music is full of errors, and I don't feel that I've written a note that, if I thought about it, I could write a better one. But you have to resolve these things and make a truce with an idea. I have amazing ideas, and if I could realize, sort of, I don't know how many percentage, I'd be the greatest composer who ever lived. Do you want me to go on? I don't know what I'm talking about.
One thing that, taking Earth Dances, that I would be very, very terrified of trying to write that piece, because I think it's very difficult, unless you're you, to know actually why what does happen next does. When I hear it, I understand it, but I don't understand it outside of that. I can't imagine how you made a plan of it, for example, because it sounds very spontaneous.
Plans. I have an anecdote, and I've mentioned this before, and so forgive me if some of you might know my anecdote about it. But in my formative years as a composer, which I suppose by the time I was sort of 25, something like that, I was not one of these imargos. There's a lot of imargos. I think he's probably one of them. It's not. This is not a. This is not. You understand what I mean by an imago? Is a creature a butterfly comes into the world fully as a full insect. There are no baby butterflies that grow into bigger butterflies. They're there. Yeah.
Can we talk about that?
You probably don't agree with me, but...
Well, I know, no, but at the same time, is that, since you were talking about your earlier days, that, let's say, if we were, he's no longer with us, but if we were to compare you to Max Davies, would you feel that, he was in a way an imago in the sense that you're talking about? Somebody who emerged very suddenly, in a way.
Yeah, and to come back to what I was talking about before, I had ideas about music in my head, without the method or without the thing of knowing how to do it. And they were much bigger than my ideas were bigger, and maybe they always are, much bigger than the talent I had to resolve them. And I always imagined. Now, I've got to be careful about being pretentious, but I always imagine a music that didn't exist, in a funny sort of way. But nevertheless, for what it's worth, these sort of things that I had in my head as about this music are still there. But it doesn't mean that there is no development within it. It's a question, and also this comes back to something else. This question of something which is a bridge passage. The bridge passage is something which is always moving towards something. And you've got to be a tonal composer really to realize these things. But so my ideas are absolutely, if I can conceptualize it, are circular rather than linear. But one of the essential, fundamental things about music that it exists in time. And it's the dealing with this time that has always been at the back of my, somewhere, what I use the word realize, one of my dreams, if you like, or something, in order to deal with these abstract things. I'm fumbling now, but I'm trying to be honest, and so I better have another question.
Can we just briefly talk a bit of history? One of the strange things in British musical history is I don't know, somebody can contradict me, of another group of composers that's been anything like so persistently prominent as what is called, for better or worse, the Manchester group or the Manchester School or whatever. In Germany and France, such groups come and go. It seems to me every 5 years there's another one I hadn't heard of. But in Britain, that's not... composers generally are quite loners, actually, and don't hunt in packs. Even though you're all clearly very, very individual figures and totally different. Can you... is there any reason why three such different composers should have come together at that time in the early 50s? And
it's a simple answer. Geographical.
Yeah.
And we were kindred spirits, and we had the arrogance of youth about us, and we were the only ones. And in a particular time of history, which was after the Second World War, a lot of things had been in abeyance, and so it was these things that had been in abeyance that we were born into, and it was pretty interesting that I would hate to be a composer today of a young person, because the journey that nothing to do with the sort of music that we'd written, but it seemed to be very clear, you know, where we were pointing, what the direction was, and nobody wanted to hear it, but that didn't matter so much, and it was a time when the music was. I was educated of music through the third program. I mean, the third program, and I heard music, and I honestly didn't know the difference between Hindemith and Schoenberg, or they were names in Penguin classics, Penguin books on music. Is this interesting?
Yes.
Well, you see, I was a clarinetist, and as a clarinetist, I was fairly good. Not good enough, thank God, because then I was always going to be in the Halle Orchestra. I was being, and that didn't become, that thank God didn't happen. One day I got my instruments and gave them away, and so I got that part of me out of my system. But the thing is that I played a lot of classical music, and classical music has been something that as I've recently discovered in the last probably 15, 20 years, because I got it absolutely out of my the front of my hair, the music. I didn't listen to music at all. I still don't, in fact. But in re-listening to music, classical music, because of what I've been doing for the last 30 years before that time, I found that coming back to it, because of what I'm doing, it has been reinvented for me. And I really am listening to a lot of classical music now in very innocent ears.
Like as if for the first time? Or?
Just like for the first time. Because, because when you're well, for me, I can't answer it. People who play in orchestras, we played the music and thought that was pretty good, and But in the way that I listen to music now, I think that I can sort of. Schumann is something that I've, as it really discovered, because people didn't play Schumann at one time, particularly in orchestras, because they said he didn't orchestrate very well, or that sort of thing. Or something like Beethoven. Now, Beethoven I find particularly interesting because to compare or to make a parallel with what sort of things that I get into in music, Beethoven never does what you think he's going to do. And it seems to me is that the essence of great music. And he gets himself in a sense into corners, and you think, how the hell's he going to get out of that? And that aspect of Beethoven particularly, I find very interesting. And how you get out, something like I feel that I became very conscious about in the whole aspect of repetition. Repetition for me is something which fascinated me, and in a lot of modern music that I heard over the years, it doesn't exist at all. I mean, repetition that you can actually hear. And the question about repetition is how you devise methods of getting out of the repetition. Why? I don't know whether. Can you tell me what I'm trying to articulate? Because
Well, look, the other day I had a student and we were looking at your Silvery Air.
Yeah.
And one of the things that we were both very hooked on was the fact that the music keeps telling you it's going at one speed and then immediately it goes at a different one, but not just any old different one. It's the fact that you're given a very clear amount of information and then you push it somewhere and you can hear, it's almost as if I can hear what you're doing to the sound each time you make a move.
Yeah.
I find that very exciting. And I think the repetition's absolutely a core part of that.
But then, yeah, I'm getting stuck. As Beethoven might get out of it.
You've got into a corner.
Yeah.
But I mean, when you started doing the repetition thing, which presumably would be with Tragoidia,
well,
or even earlier?
I don't know. I don't know. And I can't remember. And I don't know how to.
I mean, it must have been quite a daring thing to do.
Well, no, it seemed an exciting thing to do,
Yeah.
thrilling.
Yeah.
You know, I just think. And one thing that I discovered at one point, well, you probably are right. I got to. I'm very interested in the visual arts. Particularly painting. I'm interested in that because I feel that I have more in common. Usually when people write about music, it's immediately crotchets and quavers. You know, how many books have been written about music which is actually compared with certain books about the visual arts, because the thing is, in the visual arts, they're never technical. They're all about how you resolve the problems. I mean, I don't know whether any of you know the work of Philip Guston. Now, I mean, I find it extraordinary his understanding and battling with the sort of the ideas of what he does, and then along comes a figure like Morton Feldman, who I very well know. And then it turned out that Morton was a particular friend of Philip Guston, and Morty had a very big influence on me as a composer. I didn't want to write music like Morty, but his understanding about what the business was, about one's responsibility to your ideas, has meant more to me than anything anybody else. I mean, it's the nearest thing I've had to a composition teacher.
I mean, and also he works with repetition in different ways too.
In a very different way. Yeah. Well, in a sense, it's all repetition, so consequently, it is nothing's repeating in a way. Yeah. But what I was coming to about the thing, I got onto the work of Paul Klee, and Klee in the Bauhaus was finding a way of teaching, a sort of creative teaching. And so what he did is that he found a way of absolutely understanding the nature and understanding of what he had in order to teach it. And this and what he was doing, in my understanding, was that he was sort of inventing line and that as if it had never existed. If you went to the whole way of thinking about line and form, and this, to come back to really what I was talking about at the beginning, but it was systematized in a way, and then I found ways of understanding understanding about what the nature. I mean, he wrote a book called The Nature of Nature, but the nature of the material that I had, it doesn't mean that I'm trying to write music called a twittering machine. And so that it meant that I found a way into looking as if I'm looking at my material through a telescope, and when when the whole question of serialism came up.
Did you ever try writing?
Well, I'm going to tell you now.
Yeah.
The whole question of serialism that I tried, and I could never find a chord that I thought I would want to put in a composition, no matter how I manipulated my pitches through serialism. But if I sat at the piano, like Morty Feldman, which I suspect he did, but I'm sure he did, I could play chords that I thought were, for lack of a better word, beautiful, not good, or have never meant that money, but have certain qualities within them that I will sort of buy. I'll have some of that. And through someone like Paul Klee, I could then subject, as it were, I could use the metaphor of a chord. I could analyze a chord that through my intuition, I could then analyze it, as it were, through a microscope, and finding words, methods, to make more of it. If I was sculpting a tree with leaves, every leaf would be the same. An acorn leaf, we know what an acorn leaf is. It's got the serrated edge. But when you look at the leaves of an acorn tree, there are not two alike. That every one is different. Now it's this sort of way of I could begin to identify these things. I don't compose acorns, oak trees, but it's simply a metaphor for the idea of how you proliferate material. Yeah.
When you compose, is the physicality in that sense of being able to find things like that, important trigger?
Yes, but don't ask me why I like them. I mean, like's a bad word. It's like vanilla ice cream. I like vanilla ice cream and not chocolate ice cream. And also, it's not a simple thing. And then the other side of it is that I found that I always thought, when I was in Princeton, they're talking about combinatoriality in 12-tone sets. They would always talk about the pitch, but they would never talk about the interval between the pitches. Now, to me, the interval between the pitches is more characteristic than the pitch itself, and hence, the whole thing of modality, that modes have a very particular flavor, and why does Hebrew music sound Hebrew? Why does Scottish music? And it is to do, in essence, it's about the interval. So then I started analysing intervals rather than pitches, and but it all comes out of this way of thinking from Paul Clegg.
And was there, apart from later, Feldman obviously was a friend and somebody whose thought was exciting to you, was there anyone earlier, I mean, like early 20th century, a piece that comes up sometimes in connection with you, but I've never heard you talk about it, is Stravinsky's Agon, which I think was important to you at some stage.
No, the most important piece of mine, but from Stravinsky, which might be in relation to what I've been talking about, was the Symphonies for Wind Instruments. That you could write blocks of music, which were like sort of bricks, and different musics and juxtaposed musics. And it's the only piece really that he does that thing, but Agon, Agon is for different reasons. I love the formality. I love the idea of what the dance is within it, of the abstract dance that it's. So that and funny enough, and it's just a difficult one. I think in Messiaen he interested me a lot. I mean, there's a lot of Messiaen I find very difficult to deal with. But then there is there's something beneath the surface, and the way that is quite radical. In fact, it's a sort of, in essence, it's a music. It's the only music that's like that. I mean, it's completely original in a sense. But we all know what we dislike in it, don't we? But I love the obsession as well in Messiaen, and this,
Yeah. Particularly in a piece, say, like Chronochromy or something.
Chronochromy is a wonderful piece. Yeah, and also the big organ pieces, the big thundering pieces. I played, I think, the first performance in England of the quartet at the End of Time.
Oh, really?
I think so.
Wow.
But there's no I'd like to think that I did.
Well, that gave you what I think of as the best movement in the piece.
Well, the clarinet.
Yeah.
Yes.
Which is just incredible, really.
Yeah. Oh, I think the
unison one.
I love the unison one too. Yeah.
Was that in Manchester? Or?
Sorry?
Was that in Manchester?
Yeah. Dare I say this? This is a confession. I borrowed it from the Henry Watson Music Library.
You never returned it?
I've still got it.
I don't think they're going to ask for it back now.
I don't know if they even have a music library there anymore.
I think the Henry Watson Library is still there.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Well, I'll give it them back.
But that must have offered also some ways of thinking about stuff that other than the... I mean, the English music that you grew up with, or that was around then...
Vaughan Williams?
Yeah. Is it like total repulsion on your part, or what? I get the feeling it's more complicated than that. Or
it's very complicated for me. They're playing his first symphony tomorrow night. I think I played the bass clarinet in that, but then I think there isn't a bass clarinet, so so I don't know whether I did or not, but I remember. Yeah, I'm sure I did.
But you actually met him? Unless I'm mistaken.
Yeah, I was taken to him with short pants. And I went to the God, it was like the White Gates in Dorking.
Uh-huh.
Not Dorking.
Downhampton
or something.
I think it was Dorking.
It was Dorking. Yeah. And I remember he came to the door, and I just read Wind in the Willows, and I remember do you remember Wind in the Willows?
Just, yeah.
When he comes to the door in the snow, because he's I think it's the mole has tripped over the door and cut his foot, and he knocks on the door, and the badger comes to the door, and it's sort of suggesting that it's hibernation, you know, that he's all sleepy, and he comes in his nightshirt and carpet slippers, and opens the door, and it was a bit like that. I've got a letter from him anyway.
Did he look at your music at that time?
Yes, I wrote a piece called Spring Song.
Yeah.
And I was sitting there and he was sitting here, and he opened it up like that, and he pointed to things, and when I stood up, he said, "Sit down, boy." "What's this?" he would say, and I stood up and he said, "Sit down."
The only... Did it go on like that?
Yeah. Can I have a drink of water?
Yeah, please.
Think of something else to ask.
Well, I just want to say that the only early piece of yours that, as far as I know, has been released on record is a piece, correct the title if I get it wrong, but called A Cooing Bird, I think.
Yeah, that was my Vaughan Williams time.
But it really doesn't sound like Vaughan Williams to me.
No,
it really sounds like you to me already.
Well, that's good, isn't it? Yeah. It's very much of a system piece.
Oh, really?
Yeah, because one hand drifts away.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, it already sounds like a piece where you're trying to do something which is not, like British music at that time. It's trying to work out a world, to discover a world.
Maybe.
Yeah.
I mean, when I talk about what I think I'm doing, I have no idea really, in a funny way, if I know what I'm doing. And in that sense, to be systematized, apart from these things that I talk sort of slightly technical things to do with construction. But maybe that is composition.
But those are things, I think, from what you've said, that you would use for this passage or something, but it's not a method.
No. I have methods, but they're private methods.
Yeah. Do you draw because you've got a son who's an artist, and you're very alert to visual arts, do you actually draw per se at all? Do you draw as a hobby at all, or anything like that?
Not really. I do, yes I do, but it's not for public consumption. It's not, I have no pretensions that I do it. I do it for a very specific reason of understanding of what proportions are through the eye. You know, I will draw that obsessively in order to understand the question of distance. I mean, everything for me is a picture. You know, whatever I look at, everything is a picture. But the whole question of time in my pieces, about how one thing comes after another, and how how music speaks, because I think a lot of music now, apart from some rather obvious music, dangerous thing. I always thought that a lot of things in serial music, in the sense that the notes were new, but the journey was not new.
Well, I've noticed a lot of serial music has climaxes in a kind of, working up and down kind of way. It actually sounds quite traditional a lot of the time in that way.
Yeah, but there's sort of intuition about the logic of what comes next. I like to have my cake and eat it. So there are very formal things, and there are things that I get rid of, and things which I contradict. And so then when it comes back to my metaphor of Beethoven, or Schumann, for instance. Schumann, for me, is something I really discovered probably with a sort of slightly more refined ear than when I was a student. He's an extraordinary composer. Don't ask me why, I don't know. But yeah.
One thing that you've not done a lot of lately, but at one stage you were quite involved, especially, I suppose, the early 70s, in electronics, or at least you had some association with Zinoviev's studio and all that. I may be wrong, but it seems to me that your music did change around then in one respect, because there's one piece, The Triumph of Time, which has it's just much more expansive than anything else you'd written until then. Yeah, are the two connected?
Yeah, very obvious. Well, the thing is that very simply, I heard a piece of music played 2 times as slow.
Oh.
Slower. Yeah. Just an ordinary piece of music with the thing...
I see.
Yeah. But what I was interested in was the fact that how long you could play something before it gets boring. That the whole question of tempi and the thing of listening to that music which was slowed down was exactly what from a recording, a slowed down recording, to sort of listen to it and how much information you could have in such a slow piece. And that was quite interesting for me.
Because then your first opera is a fairly compact work, the second opera is proportionately on a very, very much bigger time scale, and also changes speed a lot, and has much more expense. Was that also culminating from things that you'd found in Triumph of Time or whatever? Because by the way, I have some feeling in listening to Triumph of Time that it's connected with Orpheus, the Mask of Orpheus, as a project in some way or other. Is that misleading too?
Well, I don't know. Difficult.
Is it too long ago to...
No, it's not. No, it's not.
I mean, I ask about Orpheus because it's, I think, for many people, still one of the totally key pieces in your output. It's certainly the biggest, I think.
Yeah.
And the way you talk about working suggests small scale in a way, and yet you've managed to have these very, very big. That really is, a substantial piece, and I gather it's longer than it's recorded. In fact,
yes, it is. Yes.
So, I mean, I'm just interested to know how it's possible to create a piece on that time scale without, as it were, seizing up.
Well, you keep going.
Yeah.
What?
Did the libretto help?
Yes, of course, the libretto helps. But if you've ever crossed the desert, which I've done a bit of that, or walking, I mean, writing long pieces. I gave it up,
Really?
for many years, yeah.
Why was that?
Well, I said that it was going to be done on television first, then it moved to somewhere else, and then it moved to Glyndebourne, and then it ended up in a sawn-off version at the E&O. So I said at one point, when there was no production, I said I will only finish it if somebody is. Then I came back to it. I don't know how many years it was. I had this huge pile of stuff, paper and sketches and going into the room where they were, it was like looking at the tomb of Tutankhamun. What?
It must have been terrifying.
Yeah, I mean, like sort of discovering something that, and then I tried to sort of find and join it up, and it changes very quickly. You'll find suddenly it's something else.
The libretto has been published, and one thing that struck me was that certainly in Act 2, maybe in the other acts too, I can't remember, the libretto specifies timing to the second.
Yeah.
Did you go with that?
No.
Thank you.
It was arithmetically a thing to do with a concept of superstructure, which was not invented by me. I just went along with it, and so that you have to keep going, you see.
So that's part of keeping going.
Yeah.
I don't think many librettos can have been on the surface so prescriptive to a composer.
No, well.
Do you like librettists to be that specific? Or do you like to be able to change?
It would have to be that. It can't. It's a piece that has to have that discipline, if you like.
Sort of formal quality.
Yeah.
Gawain is certainly very, very different.
Yes, more conventional.
You think?
Yeah, conceptually. Certainly.
Yes.
Yeah.
Is it more like just telling a story, in a way, would you say?
Yeah.
Many of the operas have very familiar topics.
Yeah, because when telling a myth, tell a known myth.
Right.
So you know what's going on. simply. And
do you think it allows you more freedom to do things with it?
yeah. And you know that when I wrote The Mask of Orpheus, it was going to be Faust, because I wanted a subject matter that had many dimensions and many expressions. And do you remember John Tooley?
Yes.
John Tooley at Covent Garden, and who else was it there?
Colin Davis?
Colin Davis, right. Anyway, we had a meeting with all around this big table, and the whole question of Faust had been going on for quite a while, and everybody had folders, you know, and I had to go along and tell them how give them an update about what was happening. So we sat round this table, and they started on about the libretto and the what was going to happen. And I said, could I just there's one thing I should tell you. I've changed the subject matter. I said, but never mind, it's the same opera. Because I thought, you see, that Orpheus was it was more interesting because it's richer in a way. It's more to do. It's more me in that I was interested in the whole nature of music in an opera. The whole that music was the thing that motivated the piece, and well, they took it, and well, they didn't perform it because it was at Covent Garden, and it didn't happen. That was another time it didn't happen.
I have the impression on listening to your music that I'm entering a world that I've never encountered before. I'm always very, very struck by that world. But the first time I hear a piece, it's as if I have to learn the language. The next time, one sees much, much further. Do you, and there's no reason a composer should, but do you compose at all thinking, well, look, let's say 5 times in, they'll get this bit. They may not get it at once. Or do you just simply think, whatever, this is how it's got to be? Because I think the music does work with perception. I think you do work with the listener.
Well, it seems absolutely obvious to me when I do it. Mm-hmm. It seems the most... There's a sort of contradiction in my way of thinking, and it's something that, given the time, I could talk. Maybe I could talk. This is informality, but about how the journey of a piece of music. I mean, the various things. I mean, in the end, we're free of tonality, if you wish to think of it in that way. I think serialism has freed us from, in a sense, a Mahler symphony that lasts Christ knows how long. In a sense, it's the same. It's the same journey as it's a tonal journey, and the originality is within it. But I think that maybe my way of thinking of things that my actual journeys are not tonal. I can contradict myself, and something like that. And to do things, and also the idea of something which is a piece which is in a permanent state of exposition.
Yes, I hear that. Yeah.
What?
Yeah.
It's not going through territory. It's going round. It's a static concept. And but apart from that, I don't know.
Do you generally start at page 1?
Yes.
Always?
Yeah. Always.
Because? Is it context?
Yeah, it's the context. You know, because if I like it, it's the journey that's interesting. When in my 20s and something like that, you know, Stockhausen's writing form schemes, and a lot of people were writing form schemes, and what it did is they were musical architects. They got it all sort of in it, and I wrote form schemes, and I remember I've had several circular studios, and write these form schemes which go around the wall. And I start at the beginning with whatever my form scheme was. And after 2 days and 18 inches, boredom. Because as soon as you have a context, the possibilities of how you move forward are much more interesting than anything you could pre-compose.
Yeah.
And so this idea of the journey, the originality of the journey, the logic, and it sends up things which in the scheme of doing something abstract or unrealized or something is anathema to me. So consequently, a lot of my pieces last about half an hour in a single movement.
Yes, that's your time, isn't it?
Yeah. I'm never surprised about what I write in the detail. You know, it's just striking. But there are certain juxtapositions and there are certain things of accidents which send me forward. And usually a half an hour seems about right. Yeah. But I'm more interested, I'm surprised with how the music speaks in time, what the journey of the piece is, more, than the detail of a lot of funny noises. I don't write funny noises.
No. Do you ever forget about pieces once you finish them? Do you have a need to sort of just pull yourself away from them?
No. Time. I'm of an age of understanding what the distance of time is. And I was taken back to a place where I lived with my parents, and there was a cupboard with it must have been about. Well, I was born in 1934. I think, and I was definitely living there when I was 7, but not much later. And the familiarity of this cupboard and its patina and this knob, it was as if it was just like, well, it's a bit Proustian, in fact, in a way. And I always think this about dogs, that they have no concept of time. You know, they if you leave them for 3 days or 2 hours,
it's more or less the same.
It's more or less the same thing.
They took there's a BBC film about Xenakis, and they took him back to his school when he was a kid, and very much something like what you just said. He was very startled because it hadn't changed.
No.
But I mean, he'd lost half his face and had a whole life since then.
Yeah, my son was thinking about buying a cottage in which we lived in, and that's probably 25 years ago, maybe more. And so I hadn't been there. And the banister, I automatically put my hand down the banister. I knew that there was a crack in it. But it was sort of halfway down where the wood had joined. And it was as if I hadn't. It was absolutely familiar.
Yeah, so the lady starts saying that she saw the Mask of Orpheus, Gawain, and the Minotaur. Do you have, as the composer of those pieces, ideas about staging, and what was your experience of staging for those pieces and things generally of that sort?
They did, a couple of years ago, they did Gawain in Salzburg. And they had switched the role of Gawain into Joseph Beuys.
Oh, good God.
And it was the most terrifying thing. I mean, it's stupid. I mean, I'm still suffering.
Well, yeah.
Well, I'm still suffering. I mean, it was ridiculous. I mean, and one thing they said, oh, well, you know, we're making it up to date, and it's relevant to us now. Well, first of all, Gawain is a fairy tale, for God's sake. You know, you don't understand that. And secondly, I happen to know about Joseph Beuys, but I don't think everybody knew that he always wore a hat, and he always wore these things which had a lot of pockets, and that he wrapped himself in felt and put, because his aeroplane landed somewhere in the Arctic Circle, so he took the grease from the aeroplane and rubbed it on his body, and
nothing to do with Gawain at all.
No, nothing whatsoever, and not as interesting. And I spent 9 months, at least 9 months, writing a section in it called Gawain's Journey. Now, you couldn't, if you wanted, from now to the end of time, you'll never find a better place to do this journey, because in Salzburg, which is it has, do you know, have you been there?
No, never.
Well, it's got this rock face. It's longer than this room. That's the stage.
Oh, good God.
Natural.
Real rock face?
Yeah, it's a proper rock face. And you'll never find anywhere better to do that. In order to, I don't know whether you know what Joseph Beuys did, but one of his things, he had a VW van, and he stacked it with sledges, toboggans, you know, packed in the back, and then he took them down a staircase, one after the other, yeah, and when he got to the bottom, he sat in it, and that was Gawain's journey. Now, you know, I wanted to make this wonderful horse, and you know, he goes through. I won't go on about it anymore.
Well, the horse in the first production, the horse was crucial.
Yeah.
I mean, in pantomime.
Yeah, but the possibility of what was possible with the whole idea of a journey. Anyway.
Yeah. Do we ask about other productions, or should we leave that question?
No, leave it.
No, leave it, okay. As far as I understand it, the question was asking, is there any connection with, or how do you derive meaning, whatever that's a contentious question, of course, from the building blocks of which your music's made. Perhaps another way of saying this, I don't know, might be, how do you know what the music's saying? Or is it saying?
I've no idea what it's saying. No, seriously, I've no idea. And when I talk about the building blocks, my building blocks, when I use the metaphor of this is of the oak leaf or whatever metaphor you want to use, are only the means. It's not telling you when you take the chisel to the thing what you're going to make out of it. Yeah.
When you write an opera, must you not to some extent be in control of what it's meaning?
Well, you have the narrative then, don't you?
Yes.
That's one thing you can keep.
Yeah.
And then you start making connections. It's the same thing. It's just the same thing you're writing. It's a longer piece. Yeah. The problem with music is that it takes such a long time to write.
No, that's no joke. That is absolutely, any composer will tell you that.
And it's like painting in slow motion.
Yeah, like very slow motion.
What?
Yeah.
You dip your brush in the thing and you go like that. Marvelous. I'm twiddling about with stuff and writing this day after day, one thing and another, and the whole question of my inspiration or excitement of doing it was long gone.
Yeah.
That was 3 weeks ago. And you're talking about moving across the desert. That's what I'm doing all the time.
Because like 10 seconds of orchestral music.
Yeah.
Do you get, it's an unfair question perhaps, but do you get bored in a way? It's very, very, very absorbing work, surely.
Yeah, I don't know. Well, I have no shorthand. I was in Bayreuth recently. Have you seen Wagner's sketches to the thing?
With the ring and stuff.
Yeah, the opening of at Rheingold. You could just see that he did it like that. You know, he really did. I mean, he wasn't biting his tongue, and 2 weeks later, it's all there.
Did you ever? So you don't? As you say, you don't have a shorthand.
No, I don't have a shorthand. I'll tell you what it's like listening. It's like driving in a car with the headlights, and the only bit you can see is what's immediately in front of you. Yeah. And if you could take a picture of it, you could then show it. You know that, but you couldn't. I sort of feel that that's really one of the problems.
Because it's so removed from the time it takes to play.
Yeah.
Do
you know?
When he says that those pieces, verses for ensembles, Silbrière, Secret Theatre, he feels that there was a preoccupation with something like game, roots. Sorry, rules. Excuse me, I can't hear. You're saying, has that changed?
Well, it's a very simple substructure, that, and I mean, I have to come back to the beginning. We start a whole new discussion thing about the whole question of bridge passages and moving to the and whether they are. It's that sort of formalism and the idea of the players play of music which only belongs to a particular geographical place on the stage, and but I like to think that maybe that is still there, but it has become broken and more fragmented, and that it's like something which is which needs to be like a sort of jigsaw puzzle that needs putting. It's as if I start in those pieces, as if I started with the jigsaw puzzle that finished. Now my jigsaw puzzle is I'm throwing the pieces out and sort of end up in a sort of chaos, something like that.
There was a period where your music had certain different pieces had the common starting point or end point. I mean, the note E was one thing, and then there were some pieces that ended or began with D and F for a while. That also seems to have gone.
D and F is everywhere.
Oh, is that still everywhere?
Oh yes, D and F. I used that because it was the middle of the piano.
Right.
And it seemed to be the most obvious, and it was the one thing I didn't have to think about.
As where to start, yes, yes.
I mean, but, there, yeah. So come back to the metaphor of the picture, and where you're confronted with a decision, where you make the first mark on a canvas. Where's the choice? You put it in the middle, or do you think? And then, but the choice is you've decided sort of about how big the screen is going to be. So within the context of that, you have to decide where you put it. And the first mark you make, everything then is in relation to it. That's the beginning of the journey. So consequently, I did that for that simple reason. And there's another reason which I'm not going to tell you about.
A photographer friend of mine, Malcolm Crowthers, took a wonderful photograph of you with masks from the Oresteia.
Oh, yes.
And with you next to them.
Yeah.
And you just signed it with that note, with the note E.
Oh, really?
Yes, you didn't.
Oh, well, there you go.
Which suggests there was something personal going on there. Yeah.
I became interested in ritual because I didn't even know what a ritual was. And somebody told me at one point that my pieces were rituals. And I thought, that's interesting. I invent rituals, daily rituals. I have a daily ritual for breakfast. Do you want to know?
I think many people do.
Yeah. No, but it's very formal. It's very Japanese. It's become very Japanese.
Right.
And that, and I look for devices in order that you can take the top off an egg. That would cleanly done.
I've been failing my whole life to do that.
What?
I've been failing my whole life to do that.
I'll get you one.
Yeah, I want
I'll
one.
get you one.
And again, I think that recently formal ritual is less important for your music than it was.
Yeah. Well,
a piece like the piece you wrote for Deep Time,
yeah,
seems to me to be not ritualistic in that kind of way at all.
Yeah, I like to think that it's as if I got the form scheme and written it and then sort of squashed it. I want it to have that quality of something that's in a state of explosion. Yeah. Chunks of stuff that if you found the way back, you'd end up with something more formal and more obviously ritualistic.